They say history is written by the victors, but in the world of crime, there are cryptic chapters written by nothing but the void. Chapters whose protagonists are not men we can see, but shadows that slipped through the keyhole and vanished. We live in a world that believes technology has tightened its grip on everything, and that the perfect crime has become a mere cinematic fantasy filling Hollywood screens. Yet, to understand the fallacy of this claim, we must go back in time to an era when evidence was gathered by hand and justice chased ghosts through darkened corridors. On October 17th, 1988, in the town of Cedar Creek, a place that used to sleep on a pillow of tranquility, the unthinkable happened. It wasn't just an armed robbery, nor was it mere greed for banknotes. It was a surgical operation performed on the very heart of the town's financial system. It was an act characterized by a chilling coldness and a precision that inspired more terror than the weapons themselves. Imagine that morning, mist crawling over the fields, the scent of coffee mingling with the crisp autumn air, and people exchanging morning greetings outside the doors of the Cedar Creek National Bank. None of them knew that two eyes were watching from afar, monitoring not just the money, but the breath of the employees, the movement of the clock hands, and even the rustle of the leaves. At exactly 9:02 a.m., the wall of time shattered. The shadows entered. Two individuals who left behind no name, no face, and not even a distinguishable voice. In that moment, they didn't just steal money, they stole the peace from people's hearts, leaving behind a mystery that over decades morphed into a legend, a puzzle that baffled the greatest minds in criminal investigation and left the FBI standing helpless before a small brown button dropped at the crime scene, or perhaps placed there as a final mockery of justice. Today, we reopen the files covered in dust. We will reread the testimonies written with trembling hands and analyze every second of those 7 minutes that altered the town's history. Were they ordinary criminals, renegade soldiers, or was the mastermind the one person no one ever suspected? Prepare yourselves. We are not just telling the story of a heist. We are performing an autopsy on one of the most enigmatic mysteries in the history of true crime. We are about to enter the shadow zone, where truth is stranger than fiction, and where the criminal might just be the person reading this headline with you right now. To grasp the magnitude of the shock that rocked the very foundation of Cedar Creek, one must first understand the geography of the soul in that town. Cedar Creek wasn't just a dot on a map in some obscure state. It was a living oil painting, the American dream in its quietest, most serene form. It was a town where clocks didn't just announce the time, but rather heralded continuity. Back in the 1980s, the locals boasted that they didn't have locks on their doors, not because they had nothing worth stealing, but because the very concept of theft felt foreign, like a disease belonging to loud, crowded cities, not to their oak-shaded streets. At the heart of this tranquility sat the Cedar Creek National Bank. It was a dignified stone structure featuring a gray marble facade and massive windows that mirrored the autumn sunlight. To the residents, this bank wasn't a mere cash repository, it was the house of safety. Within its walls lay bridal dowries, the hard-earned savings of farmers, and land deeds passed down through generations. John Peterson, the bank manager, was the faithful guardian of this temple, a man in his 50s who wore impeccably ironed suits and knew his customers' account numbers by heart. John represented stability. If John was fine, the town was fine. Let us pause for a moment on the morning of Monday, October 17th. It was a day that was terrifyingly routine. At exactly 8 a.m., Patricia Jenkins was stepping out of her car, carrying her leather bag and her customary smile. Patricia was the welcoming face everyone knew. As she opened the side door for employees, she failed to notice the faint shadow reflected in the glass of the shop across the street. She didn't notice the dark sedan that had been parked at the corner for 3 consecutive days, its occupants never emerging, its presence never stirring the suspicion of the lone traffic officer busy directing school buses. In those moments, the chessboard was being set with exquisite care. The thieves weren't just planning an attack, they were studying the rhythm of life. They knew the armored truck arrived at exactly 8:45 a.m. to drop off the weekly cash shipment. They knew the bank's aging alarm system required a full 30 seconds to signal the local police station. Most importantly, they knew that humans, by nature, tend to ignore unexpected details when they occur amidst a boring routine. Between 8 and 9 a.m., the town woke up slowly. The scent of fresh bread wafted from the neighboring bakery, children ran toward their schools, and inside the bank, employees exchanged small talk about the weekend's game scores. Life was moving with the precision of a Swiss watch, and no one knew that the scales had begun to tip. The thieves were in no rush. They were waiting for the golden moment, that sliver of time when the bank had received its new liquidity and the doors had opened to the public, but before the lobby became crowded with customers. Why did they choose this specific day? And why this isolated bank? Investigations would later reveal that the map possessed by the shadows wasn't just a roadmap. It was a psychological study of human reaction. They knew that a shock in a quiet town would be twice as potent, and that the ensuing confusion would paralyze everyone for the few minutes they needed. As Patricia placed the first stack of dollars into her drawer and glanced at the clock hanging above her head, the hands approached 9 o'clock. At that exact moment, in a back alley, the shadows were donning their masks. Not frightening masks in the traditional sense, but featureless rubber ones. Gray, silent faces that made you feel you were facing a void, not a human being. And with the strike of 9:02 a.m., Cedar Creek transformed from a beautiful oil painting into the stage for one of the most mysterious crimes of the 20th century. The silence that once swaddled the town was about to vanish, replaced by a scream that would echo for the next 30 years. Psychologists say that our perception of time alters in moments of extreme peril. A single second can stretch into an eternity, while a minute might shrink into the blink of an eye. At exactly 9:02 a.m., time came to a complete standstill inside the Cedar Creek National Bank. There was no prelude, no one heard the screech of tires or shouting in the street. All that happened was the heavy glass door opening with an eerie smoothness, and the shadows stepped in. They moved like two ghosts manifesting from the void. They didn't run, they didn't stumble. The first individual, the taller of the two, took a strategic position in the center of the lobby. With a fluid motion, as if he had been practicing it for years, he drew a short-barreled shotgun from beneath his long coat. He didn't point it at anyone in particular, he pointed it at the emptiness, at the very silence of the place, seeking to shatter it. In a voice that wasn't entirely human, distorted behind the smooth rubber mask, he uttered only 2 words: "Everyone down." It wasn't a panic scream, but a dry military command, cold as ice. In that moment, Patricia felt her legs give way. She collapsed behind her marble counter, the sound of her own heartbeat deafening her. She stole a glance to see what was happening and witnessed something she would never forget. The second thief wasn't looking at the people. He was looking at the target. This second thief, slightly shorter and more agile, didn't waste a single second threatening the staff. He leaped over the glass partition with the grace of an Olympic athlete. He didn't trip over phone cords, nor was he rattled by the silent alarm John Peterson had triggered under his desk. He was moving according to a mental map of the building. He headed straight for the steel door of the main vault. It was here that something occurred which would later cause investigators to review the surveillance footage thousands of times. The thief used no explosives, no loud drilling tools. He pulled a small device from his bag and began manipulating the mechanical lock with a coolness possessed only by the inventor of the lock itself. Outside the bank, life continued for 2 more minutes as if nothing were wrong, Pedestrians passed by the large windows, but the half-drawn curtains and the angle of the sun's reflection rendered the interior invisible to the world. Inside, the air was thick with a strange scent. The smell of adrenaline mingled with the scent of the thieves' brand new clothes. John Peterson, the bank manager, lay face down, feeling the chill of the marble floor, thinking only one thing: why aren't they speaking? Silence was their most terrifying weapon. The thieves never exchanged a word, never hurled an insult, and showed no sign of tension. They operated like a single machine with two minds. In the fourth minute, a soft metallic click echoed. The vault was open. At that moment, the final bastion of safety in Cedar Creek crumbled. The second thief began emptying canvas bags. He didn't take everything. He didn't touch the heavy coins, nor did he bother with small denominations. He was after the prize, the fresh bundles of $100 bills that had just arrived, and the safety deposit boxes containing untraceable jewelry and bonds. He selected his loot like a surgeon selecting tissue, with surgical precision and staggering speed. On the floor, Patricia closed her eyes and prayed. She heard only the rustle of fabric and the light thud of footsteps. She felt a shadow pass over her. The first thief was checking his watch with rhythmic regularity. At the 6.5-minute mark, the first thief let out a short, sharp whistle. It was the order to withdraw. With the same calm they had entered with, they began to retreat. They didn't rush for the door. They backed away facing their victims, shotgun still leveled to ensure no one made a suicidal move. When the door closed behind them, a silence followed that was more terrifying than the intrusion itself. It took 10 full seconds before John dared to lift his head. When he looked toward the window, he found no car, no footprints, nothing but the quiet street and the mist that had begun to dissipate. The shadows had vanished, along with $500,000, leaving an entire town to wonder, was what happened real, or was it a collective nightmare? Those 7 minutes were the perfect crime in its most haunting form. Not a drop of blood was spilled. Not a single bullet was fired, but an entire town's faith in its own safety was destroyed forever. And as the first police car arrived 2 minutes after their escape, the most complex phase began: the hunt for ghosts who didn't even leave behind the scent of perfume. When the first police patrols arrived at the Cedar Creek National Bank, the air was still charged with static electricity. There was no blood, no chaotic disarray. Yet Detective David Miller, a 20-year veteran in the pursuit of criminals, knew the moment he stepped through the door that he was not facing an ordinary crime. Miller later described the scene in his memoirs. The place looked untouched were it not for that open vault, which gaped like a deep wound in the body of the bank. The first phase of the investigation began, the gathering of crumbs. The police cordoned off the area and employees were forbidden to move. Fingerprint experts arrived, dusting every surface: handles, marble counters, teller partitions, even telephone handsets with their black and white powders. The expectation was that, in a state of high tension, the criminals must have left a trace, a thumbprint, a smear of sweat, or a stray strand of hair. But the result was the first shock in the case's trajectory: zero. Not a single print was found that didn't belong to the staff or known customers. The thieves had worn thin surgical gloves beneath leather ones, preventing even the natural oils of the skin from seeping through. They didn't stop there. Investigators discovered that the thieves had sprayed a special chemical mist on the surfaces they touched to erase any biological residue. We were dealing with ghosts who possessed an advanced knowledge of forensic science, knowledge typically reserved for lab technicians themselves. While the fingerprint experts wrestled with the void, Detective Miller interrogated the victims. Here, the second dilemma emerged: the erosion of memory. When he asked Patricia about the thieves' features, she couldn't provide an answer. She said they had no faces, they were just pieces of gray rubber. As for their voices, they had been distorted by small electronic devices placed under the masks to alter vocal frequencies. Even their height was a puzzle. By reviewing surveillance footage, investigators discovered the thieves wore shoes with variable internal lifts, making an accurate estimate of their stature impossible. In the midst of this frustration, a junior detective shouted, "Found it!" On the floor, beside the steel gate of the vault, lay a single piece of physical evidence, a small brown button made of cheap plastic, appearing as though it had fallen from a jacket or coat. The team's hopes soared. This button could lead them to a specific garment, then a store, and finally a buyer. The button was dispatched to the FBI laboratories in Washington under heavy guard. Investigators spent hundreds of hours tracing it, only to realize in the end that it was the thieves' finishing blow. The lab discovered that the button belonged to a jacket sold by the thousands at Walmart, but more deviously, microscopic examination showed that the threads clinging to the button hadn't been snapped by a sudden tug. They had been meticulously snipped with small scissors. The button hadn't fallen by accident. The thieves had placed it there as bait. They wanted the police to waste weeks of effort and resources chasing a lead that led to a dead end. Their message was clear: we know how you think, and we are one step ahead. The investigation then moved to the bank's inner circle. Phone records were scrutinized, and the bank accounts of all employees and even third-degree relatives were monitored. John Peterson was interrogated for days. How had the vault been opened so easily? Had he given the code to someone? John underwent 3 polygraph tests, and each time the results confirmed his total honesty. The man was psychologically broken. He felt his professional dignity had been stolen along with the money. As months passed, the black hole of the investigation widened to swallow everything. The stolen cash never surfaced. The currency serial numbers were never flagged in any banking system worldwide. The suspect vehicles turned out to be stolen from distant states and were found torched in the surrounding forests before the police could reach them. Detective Miller began to realize a bitter truth. The crime didn't start at 9:02 a.m. on October 17th. It had begun years earlier through planning, surveillance, and training. The Shadows knew everything about Cedar Creek, while Cedar Creek knew nothing of them. With every passing day, the case grew cold, the evidence evaporated, and a small brown button sat in an evidence locker as a symbol of mockery toward justice. This was the moment when the townspeople began to look at one another with suspicion. If the thieves had left no trace, was it perhaps because they never left the town? Maybe they were sitting in the cafe across the street at that very moment, sipping coffee, watching the police cars depart in despair. In this chapter of the investigation, the crime wasn't solved. Instead, the mystery grew heavier and the legend began to take shape. When the doors of justice close without answers, the public imagination flings its own wide open. In Cedar Creek, people stopped talking about what happened and began obsessed over who did it. In the absence of physical evidence, the finger of blame began to point in 3 distinct directions, each carrying as much logic as they did terror. Theory 1. The soldier from the shadows. This theory gained traction 6 months after the crime, when Detective Miller noticed a specific pattern in the suspect's movement and tactical control. The duo moved with a technique known as coordinated pair maneuvering, a tactic taught to elite special forces units. Eyes turned toward Marcus Phelps, a local veteran and former scout who had served behind enemy lines, returning to town just a year before the heist. Marcus was an introvert with the technical expertise, the physical prowess, and, most importantly, a hidden motive. His application for a loan to expand his father's crumbling farm had been rejected by the Cedar Creek National Bank only months prior. Marcus was placed under heavy surveillance, but investigators hit a brick wall. On the night of the crime, he had been on a solo hunting trip in the mountains. He had no witness, but the police had no proof. Was Marcus the commander who set the rhythm for those 7 minutes? His name lingered in whispers until he abruptly left town, never to be heard from again. Theory 2. The Inside Betrayal. This was a theory that tore the social fabric of Cedar Creek apart. How did the thieves know about the extra cash shipment? How did they know that a portion of the security system in the basement was offline for maintenance? Suspicion fell upon Tom Hardy, the security systems engineer who had updated the bank's hardware a year earlier. The investigation revealed that Tom was drowning in gambling debts in a neighboring state. On the day of the robbery, he claimed to be homesick, yet neighbors reported his car was missing from the driveway all morning. Did Tom sell the blueprints of the bank's soul to a professional syndicate in exchange for a cut? Or was he the expert who cracked the vault with such staggering speed? The charges never stuck, but Tom took his own life 3 years later, leaving behind a cryptic note: "The shadows leave no one in peace." Theory 3. Government Phantoms. The wildest of the theories, yet the most unsettling. Some independent analysts suggested the operation wasn't a heist in the traditional sense, but an extraction. Rumors swirled that one of the safety deposit boxes contained documents or assets belonging to a high-ranking political figure, or perhaps something the public was never meant to see. This theory explains why the stolen money was never spent and why the professionals were so unnaturally clean. Was the robbery a mere smokescreen to retrieve the content of a specific box? It would explain why the second thief initially ignored piles of cash to head straight for the private boxes. If true, the shadows didn't vanish into the woods. They simply returned to their offices in Washington or New York, and the case was buried by higher authorities. Between these three theories, the truth was lost. Detective Miller used to say, "In every crime, there is a single thread that ties everything together." But in the Cedar Creek story, it seems someone cut all the threads before we even arrived. The suspects turned into ghosts, and the theories into legends told in coffee shops. One question continued to haunt everyone who entered that bank. Was the person behind the mask an enemy from the outside, or was it a neighbor who smiled at you every morning, hiding a missing brown button beneath their coat? It is a mistake to think that a crime ends when the perpetrators vanish from the scene. For the town of Cedar Creek, the moment the shadows stepped out the door was merely the beginning of a different kind of imprisonment, a prison of fear and disorientation. The money stolen could be replaced by insurance companies, but what was stolen from the souls of the victims is something no financial institution can ever restore. Consider Patricia Jenkins, a woman who saw the bank as her second home. After that morning, Patricia could no longer bear the sound of a door opening unexpectedly. She resigned only a week later. She spent the next 30 years double-checking the locks on her house 5 times before sleep. For Patricia, the world was no longer a safe place. At any moment, from behind any door, a faceless man could appear and cause time to stand still once again. Patricia passed away a few years ago, and her neighbors say that even in her final days, she looked with suspicion at every stranger who passed her window. As for John Peterson, the bank manager, he lived through a different kind of torment. In a small town, when you fail to protect the people's trust, a silent blame follows you everywhere. Though the investigations cleared him completely, the reproachful looks in the eyes of farmers who lost their wives' jewelry in the safety deposit boxes tore him apart. John suffered from severe depression and spent the rest of his life searching for the thread he might have missed. He reviewed the surveillance tapes at home daily until the ribbons literally wore away. John died still whispering the name of the shadows, as if the crime were a closed circle he could never escape. The scars were not only individual, they were collective. The very psychological fabric of Cedar Creek changed. Suddenly, fences began to rise around homes. The trust that once defined the neighborhood vanished. People began to ask themselves in secret, who possessed enough information to do this? Veiled accusations began to erode old friendships. The crime was like a stone cast into a still pond. Its ripples continued to expand until they muddied everything. Even the bank itself was never the same. Systems were upgraded, bulletproof glass barriers were installed, and cameras monitored every corner. Yet, these security measures served as a daily reminder of defeat. The bank became a cold fortress rather than a social pillar. The shadows had proven that the system was fragile and that safety was a mere illusion that could be dispelled in just 7 minutes. Every year, on the anniversary of the heist, a few of the old residents gather in the cafe across from the bank. They don't talk about the money, they talk about lost time. They speak of the versions of themselves who once trusted strangers and slept without fear. They realized that the true criminal didn't just steal cash, he stole the soul of the town, leaving a void in its place that no amount of gold could fill. We have reached the end of our journey into the corridors of the Cedar Creek story. Decades have passed, the world has changed, and the technology of 1988 now looks like something from the Stone Age. Yet, in a police evidence locker, there remains a small plastic bag containing that cheap brown button, the lone witness to an undefeated crime. Detective Miller is retired now, sitting on his porch, watching the sunset, still keeping a copy of the case file. In his final interview, Miller said, "I know they are still out there somewhere. Maybe they've become grandfathers now, telling their grandchildren stories of their cleverness. Or maybe they live in constant terror that someone will knock on their door one day." But the more terrifying truth is the other possibility. The possibility that the thieves lived and died without anyone ever knowing their secret. That they spent that money building quiet, respectable lives while their victims continued to suffer from nightmares. Is the story truly over? As long as the questions remain unanswered and the shadows remain faceless, the case stays alive. Every time a bank door opens in a quiet town, and every time a mysterious figure with blurred features passes by, the memory of Cedar Creek is resurrected. Thank you for joining us in this in-depth investigation. The story of the faces in the mist reminds us that the world is full of secrets and that behind every calm face, a storm may be brewing. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe in the perfect crime? Or will justice, however long it takes, ultimately prevail? Remember, your support is the engine that keeps these investigations alive. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next crime.